now, shortly thereafter, 12:15, we're going to invite Dr. Stephen Gaskill to make a presentation on physical activity and academic performances in 2nd through 12th grade Missoula County youth. Welcome, Dr. Gaskill.
Right? Oh, miracle just magically appears. Yeah, so if you can get where you can see the screen, and I think I'll probably just sit down and talk if that's all right. Is that okay for you? Then I can see this screen here, but I see that one, and I'll figure out how to run this. Yeah, this project came forth as a result of Laura Mohar. She was one of our graduate students, and she was looking for a project. I'd been thinking about doing this for quite a while, and she really didn't know what she was getting into when we have to go into the schools and make arrangements with the schools to actually measure physical activity, and eventually to get a lot of data on what they're doing outside of school and in school, relate that to grade point averages or to test scores. But she did a fabulous job coordinating it. There's a long list up here of other people, Carla Cox and Greg Oliver from the health department who helped, Tucker Miller, who's one of our health enhancement teachers. And then Kelly Rice picked up the project from Laura Mohar and took it into the high schools, and also did a very extensive review of literature, and she did a project looking at knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes, which was very helpful to this. So this has been I think we're now in the 4th year of looking at this. We're currently working with college students to see how they fit into this picture. And it really should say physical activity related to academic performance and to health in 2nd through 12th grade students. And this was the title that came out of the story in the Missoulian that you may have seen a little while ago, that Missoula high school students flunk fitness. And when I first saw that, I went, oh. And I thought about it and said, you know, he really got the essence of it. They did flunk fitness. They flunked physical activity for health and fitness, as you'll see shortly. You know, where does this lead us? You could put the dial on anything in there when we're talking about nutrition or physical activity. You know, exercise can cause, you know, hypothermia in twins or rats. But in reality, we know a tremendous amount about the relationship between physical activity and health now. And starting in 1996, when the Surgeon General of the United States came out with his consensus report that experts around the country had put together that said adults need to accumulate 30 minutes of moderate physical activity, the equivalent of a brisk walk on a daily basis, in about 7 to 10 minute bouts of exercise to dramatically reduce the incidence of chronic disease. He was right, and evidence since then has continued to support that. We now know that children need about 60 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, 5 to 6 days a week, to meet health guidelines and to keep them from becoming obese, sedentary adults. So we're trying to stop the onset of adult diseases at the youth level rather than waiting till they're adults and already sedentary. You've seen these maps. I only have the 2006 map up here. I didn't have time to get the 2007 map in, but it is striking when you look at what's happening amongst adults. There is also you can also get the maps for children, not quite as frequently, and the same thing is happening. So these are the physical activity recommendations that are currently put forth by the Center for Disease Control, the American Medical Association, ACSM, and others have different recommendations going up to 60 minutes for adults. But in general, the youth guidelines are that they need to accumulate at least 60 or more minutes of physical activity most days of the week. And that usually means 5 days of the week. And then I have in yellow up there 10 minutes at a time. That's disputed. Some people will say it can be in 1 minute increments. Others will say it has to be at 10 minutes at a time. And I think the data is kind of mixed, but they do need to get 60 minutes. And you'll see that our students aren't doing that in many cases. In some cases, we're doing quite well. The other way you can meet physical activity recommendations for youth is to accumulate 20 minutes of vigorous physical activity. That's the equivalent of a jog or running at least 3 days of the week. So either way seem to be equally sufficient to promote health. And if they can do both, that's even better. So these are things that you and the health board know, that youth that are regularly physically active are reducing the youth onset of chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, all of the things that we hear about regularly. We're helping to build healthy bones and muscles, which reduces the long-term osteoporosis, improves strength and endurance, They tend to be able to live later into their life independently, maintains a healthy weight, and all the associated health benefits that go with that. A little further down there on that list, it says that regular physical activity has been shown to improve academic achievement, even when that academic time is replaced by physical activity, up to 45 minutes per day. So if you take a class of academics away and add physical activity, what you find is the students do equally well in class, but they also do much better in their health outcomes associated with physical activity and health. And our data will support that here, as you'll see. There is an increasing trend towards physical inactivity, increasing obesity. We've seen that, but we really don't know what was going on in Missoula. We have some ideas just by looking and asking. The health department's going to begin tracking BMI in third graders, I believe, which I think will be a very good thing to do. At the same time, we need to track physical activity so that we see what are the causes and effects, because as all of you know, we always talk about nutrition and physical activity as being related to obesity. And they both are strong players, and we need to look at both of them. I'm talking about the physical activity, and don't forget about the nutrition as I'm up here. As it says up here, only 30% of high school students have been reported by the CDC to meet the guidelines of 60 minutes per day. When we start looking at adults, we're talking about 33%. So by the time they're in high school, their attitudes and behaviors are quite well fixed, and we're no different in Missoula. So why this project? We really didn't know much about what was going on in Missoula, and I think this is a great community to work with just because it's a manageable size. So we decided to start local and probably stay local. So what was done when I last reported this, I think we had less than 500. Since then, we've finished the analysis on all the rest of the students and actually added 2 more schools. So in 5 elementary, 5 middle, and 4 high schools now, we have 722 second through 12th grade students who have worn these little monitors, and you can see over here this little activity monitor on their wrist for a week. And we actually only look at the last 5 days when they're wearing it, so that they've got a day and a half where they get acclimatized to it and acclimated, and they don't sit there going like this all the time trying to make them go off. And it's amazing how you just see it within a half a day go like that, and then they're very steady. So in addition to that, we collected height, weight, age, gender, start time and end times of PE, when they were in recess, and in high school they don't have recess, so we looked at the lunch period to see what they're doing in lunch, which I can tell you right now is nothing. What they did in sports, and what they did during the school day and out of the school day. So we've got great data on where they're being active. Later we were given access to about 2/3 of the students' grade point averages for the middle school and high school, and then we now have test data for about 60% of the students in those grades where they did tests, and I'll explain that as we get there. So very interesting in the correlations that we were able to do with that. Again, Missoula has a lot going for it, and you'll hear me make the statement at the end of the lecture that if we can't get kids to be physically active here, America's in a big hurt. Because what better place? I mean, we really should be leading the country. So just as an overview, this data right here shows the percent of students overall meeting health guidelines. So in elementary school, 78% of the kids were doing 60 minutes or more 3 out of the 5 days that we measured them. Middle school, 54%. By high school, it's dropped to 11%. In parentheses over here, this is the number of high schoolers that would have met physical activity guidelines for adults of 30 minutes. So we're doing a little better than the CDC at 36%, but 43% are meeting, 30 minutes. Only 11% right here. This is fairly scary when you look at how sedentary our high school students. So overall, we've got 47%. If you look at fitness, and we measured fitness as 2 out of the 5 days, meeting 30 minutes of vigorous, brisk jogging or running or above. 27% of elementary schools, and it dropped down to 2% of high school students are being vigorously active. And then this column over here is just how many students met either this one or this one. So it really doesn't change much over here from the moderately active ones. So we have a dramatic decline in physical activity, moderate physical activity for health across the age spectrum. This is just what it looks like graphically. You have males in blue, females in red, and you can see the grade level across the bottom. And there's, if you just look at it, we have elementary school through here, middle school through here, and then this dramatic drop off to high school here. There's no difference between males and females overall, and I think where we appear to see a difference here between males and females, here and here, those differences are just a random statistical blip based on our collection. There's no differences between males and females across the range here. This is your vigorous physical activity, and I want you to look over here at the scale. This is minutes per day. And this was collected in 1 minute increments, so we didn't even look to see if they were doing it for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And here's second grade, 20 minutes. They're doing pretty well. This is males. Across here, there is a statistically difference in every age group except grade 6 between males and females. Males average about 50% more vigorous physical activity per day. But look down here at high school. We're less than 4 to 5 minutes per day of the equivalent of a jog or more. Our high schoolers are not being vigorously active. Now I have to say that we did not include varsity athletes that were in their season in this, but varsity athletes out of season do not look different than the rest of the population. They are not being active when they're not in their sport. So kids are beginning to be trained to the idea that we do physical activity in structured programs. They're not spontaneously playing, at least by the age of high school. At least that would be my interpretation. This is the location of physical activity. The red line is out of school in elementary, so you see more physical activity is occurring in the out of school hours than in school. But this is in 1 minute bouts, but it's still a lot of physical activity in elementary school. You see it dropping down to the middle school, and then down to high school, where it's very evenly split between in school and out of school at about 20 minutes each. So averaging about 40 minutes. You know, we say that sounds pretty good, but 60 minutes is the standard for health. And this is a significant drop across grade levels, or across school levels. So overall, about 60% of physical activity is occurring out of the school, about 40% in the school. And Kelly Rice's data, parents' belief were that it should be split about evenly 50-50. And when you look at, waking hours, 16 hours in the day, they spend about 7 to 8 hours in school. That's about half the time. You think, well, maybe it should be evenly split. I don't have an opinion on that. I think the academic classes are very important. So there's more free time possibly out of school, but this was a parent's belief and attitudes towards that. You'll see more on this later. A couple graphs. Let me see if I can make them come up here. This is minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, so anything a brisk walk or above, per 30 minutes of PE. And this is standardized to time so we can see how well the PE teachers are doing. When you look up here, and just look at the 1 minute bouts, that's really in the purple here. PE teachers in Missoula in the elementary school, about 11 minutes out of every 30 minutes have the kids at least briskly walking or more. Nationally, those numbers are about 8 or 9. So we're doing a little bit better. In middle school, with the addition of the Lifetime Physical Activity program, trying to promote that, they're doing even better at about 13 minutes, although the longer duration, 10-minute bouts, is dropping off, but that's hard to do in a 30-minute to 50-minute class time. But by high school, very low participation, and when they are participating, 6 minutes, less than 6 minutes of every 30 minutes, or 12 minutes of an hour, are actually doing something physically active for health. So we're not doing very well in high school, and we're not having many kids participate. I'm sorry I don't have the percentages up here, but I don't know those, but they're reported as being very low in high school. This is minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity in recess. And this is really interesting to me. If you look over here, look up here on PE, they're at 11 minutes and 13 minutes. In elementary school, they're at almost 16 minutes. If you just send kids in elementary school out to play, they're more active than they are in PE. Not a lot more active, but it's just an interesting aside. But in middle school, they've gone from 13 minutes here down to 7 minutes. They become less active when you let them go on out on their own. And by high school, this is lunch period. During their lunch period, out of their hour of lunch, they're doing about 5 minutes of walking, or 3 minutes out of every half hour. So again, the high school kids tend to be parking their cars, and if they go out to lunch, which many of them do, it's the walk to the car and then get to lunch, get back, park their car, and walk in. Hellgate High School, interestingly, was higher here than either Sentinel or Big Sky. Hellgate doesn't have access to parking. They have to park further away. And we could tell you what their average walk time is. It's about 4 minutes. So they're getting about 8 minutes of activity versus the 5 or 6 that Hellgate, or that Big Sky and Sentinel were getting. And Frenchtown they drive too. We measured out at Frenchtown. This was a way to standardize the physical activity across the day. Using these little monitors, we can estimate the kilocalorie cost of all movement. And this is light, moderate, and vigorous, so all physical activity converted into kilocalories. And the blue line is males, the red line is females. And what you just simply see is that they're spending about 9 kilocalories per pound per day in physical activity. And to put that in perspective, that's quite good. Look what happens by the time they get to high school. They've cut that almost exactly in half. They're down to average of 4.6 between males and females pooled kilocalories per pound per day. They're half as active by the time they get to high school. And calories are something that we understand. And if we're talking about weight loss, they tend to be eating quite a bit more at this age and are less active. More calories per pound, and they're less active per pound. And the net result is we're gaining weight. Another way to look at it is how many daily sedentary minutes, taking out 8 hours for sleep, which is just an estimate. We could have probably told when they're sleeping with the ActiCals, but we just said the easiest thing to do is say what's happening in sedentary behavior. And you look at grade level, and through 6th grade, there's no change in sedentary minutes. 7th grade, significant increase. 8th grade, a significant increase, and a significant increase to 9th grade. These should have been moved over. That's so between these two here. And by 9th grade, they don't change. But this represents going from 650 minutes up to 775 minutes. A little more than 2 hours of the day went from being physically active, at least light activity, to no activity. Sedentary means what we're doing right here. They weren't moving. So, questions being, what do we do about this if we want to? This is a fairly complex slide, but it's easy to understand if I walk you through it. 72% of our population that we measured were considered to be normal weight. That's using percentile of BMI, less than the 85th percentile of BMI. Of those 72% of our population, only 46% of them, right here, were meeting guidelines for moderate physical vigorous activity for health. By the time we get into the overweight category, these are children with BMI between the 85th and the 95th percentile for their age-adjusted BMIs. Only 22% of them are meeting physical activity standards for health. In the obese children, those in the 95th or above BMI percentiles, I think it's 7% are meeting activity guidelines for health, again. So there's this tremendous inverse relationship between BMI, or body mass index, and vigorous or meeting guidelines for health. And I think everybody knows that, but to me this is just dramatically clear here that our at-risk populations are right here and here. But we still have to worry about the other 55% of these kids that are normal weight. More data, this is what gets the educators interested in this, is that in Missoula, if we take the lowest tertile, or the third of the population with the lowest physical activity across all grade levels, we end up with this average of 2.7, a grade point of 2.7. By the time we get to the middle third and the highest third, there's no difference, but that grade point has gone up about a third of a grade point average. And that's in return for this modest, vigorous, modest physical activity that these students right here are doing to get from here to here. Now I put down here that the R value in here only accounts that vigorous, or the moderate and vigorous physical activity that they do only accounts for about 8% of their grade point. So it's not a strong relationship, but it's a significant relationship. And it's consistent, as you'll see in the next couple of slides. This is looking at test scores. And the way that this was done, for every school and for every grade level that we have test scores, we took the highest test as being 100%, the lowest test as being 0%, and then we did everybody as a percentile in between. So it was within their school and their class that we're looking at this. And if you take the lowest third of physical activity students right here, their percentiles are slightly below 50th percentile. By the time we get to the middle physical activity and the high physical activity, the 2/3 most active kids, and these kids in here are just barely meeting guidelines for health on average, you can see that we went from less than 50 to about the 72nd, 73rd percentile, and up here about almost the 80th, 77th percentile, I think. But this is not significantly different. So the big jump goes from being very inactive to being moderately inactive for a grade point average. We see the same thing for health. If we can get children to go from being sedentary to just barely meeting guidelines for health, they see the same jump in decreases in risky behavior or health outcomes for chronic disease. This is the same data by grade level. You can see we don't have data in every grade, but this is very interesting to me. If you look at the red line, this is the low physical activity. As they go from third grade to high school, you can see a decrease in their percentile score. The 2/3 most active, the green and the purple, as we go from elementary school or third grade up through high school, their scores improve. What this says to me, and maybe it says something differently, is that in elementary school, where we don't have quite the difference between activity and inactivity, there's not the difference. It doesn't separate very well down here. But even by 5th grade, definitely by middle school, and then out here in high school, the difference in self-esteem and how they're dealing with classes, how they feel about themselves, their study skills, whatever it is, there's a tremendous difference in test scores between the lowest active and the most active. But there's also a tremendous difference in the activity that these people are doing versus these people. And we don't have enough data to really tease it out much more than this right here. But with the test scores, unlike the grade point, which only accounted for about 8%, the test scores down here the physical activity accounts for about 16% of the test scores, suggesting that test scores are probably a better measure than grade point average. Well, I can't say this suggests that, but I think that's probably true, and that's why we're seeing this better relationship. And 16%, yeah, it's a major player. What are the other players? Again, self-esteem, genetics, how much time they're willing to study, their parents, everything else, their teachers. But this is one you can put your finger on. Physical activity and absenteeism, it's the same thing, same tertiles. The least physically active are missing about 7 days per year of school. And then if you get to the middle physical activity and the highest physical activity, we about cut that in half. Again, physical activity is related to health. Health is related to how many days that they miss. This is the work from Kelly Rice, where she did the survey with parents, and then we're now doing it also with students, but this was mainly the parents' information. What did the parents perceive as being the barriers to physical activity? And you can probably guess most of them, they're up here. Screen time, including TV, computers, video games. A lot of parents perceive that homework and other school requirements required the kids to be in studying, that they just don't have much time for physical activity. But then you look at accessibility. Parents do not believe that accessibility is a problem in Missoula. And others were parental influence, parental physical activity, which we know plays a role. The parents don't perceive that, but we know that active parents tend to have active children much more strongly than active children being there when we don't have active parents. Equipment, sibling activity, etc. Where should physical activity occur? You've heard the first one. Most parents believe it should be about 50-50 in and out of school. About 3/4 of parents said that. About a quarter of parents said that most physical activity should occur out of school, and about 4% think the school should be doing everything for everybody and that they should take care of the physical activity too. But a small number. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer in that. Kelly asked, how far do you live from school and how do you get to school? Under 1 mile, about 50% of them got there on their own power, which is wonderful. But still 30% arrived via car, 20% via the bus. And a lot of that is related to the perception of safety on the streets, and I think safe routes to schools will make a big difference in that. 1 to 2 miles, we dropped from 48% down to 7% walk or bike, so there seemed to be a definite threshold of where people were comfortable, more ride the bus, and more than 2 miles from school, the numbers dropped further. I think it was about 4% walk or bike. That's different from the 1970s, where 1 to 2 miles, about 70% of children in the United States got to school under their own power. So we've had a definite shift in how children are getting to school. Whether that's good or bad, I think it's one of the ways, though, that we can get that additional physical activity very easily with what I call purposeful activity. We'll get to that. More information from Kelly. About 1/3 of parents feel that their child receives enough physical activity during school. 3/4 feel that physical activity improves their child's academic performance, which is a really good thing to understand, that parents actually believe that, and their belief goes along with the science. And only 8% of parents feel that physical activity would distract their children from completion of their homework, and really from academics is what they were saying. So, that middle statement up there, I think, is really important, that parents will get behind this if the data is out there that says physical activity will improve academic performance, because we know that's important. So it's something to kind of hold on to. Additional things, this one caught us by surprise. Most parents believe physical activity for their children would help them be healthy, control their weight, give them more energy, be fun for them, keep them in shape. Parents knew that. This wasn't the one that surprised me. We'll get to that, I think. 66% of parents report participating in physical activity with their children less than 2 days per week. I think this is something that's very concerning, because there's a lot of evidence out there that shows that parents that are active with their children, especially dads that are active with their children, have a tremendous influence on lifetime physical activity. So our lack of physical activity with the parents being involved is a little bit disturbing. This is the one that I think surprised all of us. 98% of students believe that they are physically active. So we have a big education issue, and help people understand what's necessary. And 71% of parents believe that their students are very active after school, and it's not up here, but somewhere around 85% of students or parents believe that their children are physically active enough to meet health guidelines. So we have a disparity in belief and reality. I mentioned this earlier, there's only small differences between males and females in moderate to vigorous physical activity. And they're both getting equal amounts, just not enough as we get older. But the big area is that females are only having about 50% of the vigorous physical activity running as males do, and that's pretty much across the spectrum. So that's a big area for improvement.
Do you think that has changed from over the years, from the 70s, 80s? Have women normally been lower or men higher?
That's hard to say, because there's very little physical activity data on younger females or on youth prior to 1990-95. because physical activity was stressed more for men than it was for women. So I don't know, but my bet is, I think that the data suggests that females are catching up in the gap of physical activity overall. I can't answer the one on vigorous. I don't know.
Are they catching up, or the guy being?
Well, yeah, that's a good question.
And historically, there weren't competitive sports, intervarsity type sports
Right.
for women. When I was in high school, there was the Girls Athletic Association, with all of the varsity teams being, except for tennis, I think. That was about the.
And it's really been since Title IX occurred that we've seen the increase in that participation, which I think is helping the women catch up. But remember, in high school, we didn't include varsity athletes in season in this data. So we don't have that data. And the reason for that is that so many of those sports are contact, and these things are waterproof, but they're not hockey and football and soccer and basketball proof. And we had a couple destroyed early on. We decided that, at $500 a crack, it was more than I could do as a volunteer effort. 53% of Missoula 2nd through 12th grade students who are not meeting health physical activity guidelines, are still a concern. The relationship between the high BMI and low physical activity, I think, needs to be addressed. There's definitely the high-risk groups, both the overweight groups, the 85th to 95th percentile, and then the obese groups greater than the 95th percentile, are really very, very high-risk groups. And they're high risk just from the obesity, but they're also very high risk from lack of physical activity. And we need to figure out what to do with them across the spectrum, really, there. The grade point average data is very compelling. It's what the educators are most interested in when I show them. I'd like to have more of the data. As I said, we don't have all the students, partially because they've transferred between school districts, and we gathered that data afterwards from the school districts, and they're very cooperative on that. But there's a very strong relationship. They're statistically significant. They go across every grade level that we've looked at. And I don't think that they're going to go away, and they're being reported more and more now as more people are doing this kind of research. So I think we'll see very similar things coming out, and I hope that the pendulum will swing back towards finding ways to increase physical activity. In a couple of weeks, I'm meeting with all of the PE teachers in Missoula County Public Schools. We're going to do a day-long workshop, with this data, and then have them figure out where they can go with it. But they're really not the problem. They're doing better than the national average. It isn't physical education, in that physical education where we're failing. It's in having students and youth understand the need for physical activity and being active on a regular basis. And I've got some ideas, but
Your data on that, the rather low number of minutes in which they were physically active during a PE class, suggests there might be some opportunity there.
Yeah, but you also have to realize that they have to do some instruction. There's some, startup time and time at the end. And so if you can get to 50% of the time at moderate vigorous physical activity, they're doing quite well. I think in high school is where we're seeing some problems. But in the middle school, I don't think they're really the issue. We're not going to change things a lot by increasing the amount of PE.
No, but the effectiveness, the amount of activity during the PE class.
Yeah, and that could go up a little bit, but probably not a lot through middle school, anyway.
What are the PE requirements for grade, middle, and high school?
In elementary school, and I may get these wrong because I'm not the expert in that. Kelly Rice could probably fill in, or somebody else here, but I'll start with high school, is that they have to participate in PE or in health enhancement 2 years out of their school year, out of their 4 years, but they have many ways to opt out of it. And it's health enhancement now, which means they're teaching both health and PE. Which I have mixed feelings about. I think both are so important. I hate to see them be combined. So that means if they have class 3 days a week in high school, half of it, that time is supposed to be health, and half of it's supposed to be PE. So the amount of time that they actually have for physical activity in high school is very low. in elementary school, between recess and physical education, they're supposed to get that daily. But it's...
And they have a health section that might go for 3 weeks at a time when you don't dress up.
Right, yeah, so they may go 3 weeks with no physical activity at all, and then do 3 weeks of physical education. And I think that's, that was done because of the rural nature of Montana, and, we can't afford to have PE teachers and health teachers both. And so, they were combined into one. And it's been the history has shown that PE, the amount of PE required since the 1970s has dropped steadily till about 2004, and now we're actually seeing in some states an increase in PE as the relationship between health and physical activity has become apparent. And I think the school district is interested. I mean, I think having this meeting is the first step, and I'm actually very excited that they've come forth and asked that we'll participate, and I'm hoping Greg will participate in that also. So there's just kind of a summary. There's a large drop in physical activity for health between elementary and middle schools, and a greater drop between middle school and high school. It's consistent with what others have found. It's been reported frequently. It's just the drops are getting bigger and bigger as every year comes by. Only 43% of Missoula of high school students meet physical guidelines for health and are increasing their risk for future diseases and developing their behaviors that they're going to have as adults. And only 2% of the high school students are meeting fitness guidelines of 20 minutes of vigorous physical activity at least 2 out of the 5 days that we measured them, or 3 out of 7 days of a week is currently measured. And I think it's important to put this in here that our PE teachers in elementary and middle school are actually doing better than the national average, which is about 25% of the time being actually physically active during PE. So about 7.5 minutes out of 30 minutes, or 15 minutes out of an hour. So we're doing better, but high school, they're actually a little below the national average. There was just a report out of Illinois and another one out of Wisconsin, a very similar data collection to what I did. Actually, they used some of the methods that we've developed here, and same patterns, same numbers. We are not different than other communities in America. Our youth look just the same. I was hoping we'd find that we were better, and in some areas we're a little bit better, in other areas we're the same. But I think there should be concern about this decrease in physical activity, not just in Missoula, but across the country. But I'm a believer that we probably have a chance to change it here. I think there are probably areas of the country that are, people can't get their hands around it. But Missoula, a lot's going on here. About 40% of the moderate vigorous physical activity is occurring in the schools. What we can change in the schools, I think they're going to do everything they can to. The next question comes is, how do we increase it out of school? And I've put down my, my little thought there. General promotion of information and inclusion of physical activity throughout the school day might help increase moderate vigorous physical activity. This is one of the ideas that, if teachers talk about it and model it a little bit. It's happened in some schools in Wyoming where they've dramatically increased within a school district just by having teachers regularly talk about physical activity and how important it is. Not teaching it, just talking about it, but having the teachers and the school administrators and officials actually participate in physical activity events and walking races and fundraisers with physical activity. And I put up here that there's lots of things going on in Missoula, and one of the things that Greg, Oliver, and I and our group have been talking about is that if we have a lot of people doing a little bit, that may tip the balance. And then I added these last two, since I talked about this last, and just to say that we often think in terms, and as a health department or the Parks and Recreation, we always think about what new structured programs can we offer that are going to get kids to be active or adults to be active. But my belief, after reading lots of papers and looking at where things have been active, is that we actually have to change the attitudes of people in the community and the knowledge that they have to help them be encourage them to be more active and get them to understand what the benefits are, what the long-term consequences of not being physically active are, and start to let people be active on their own. So I've put down here, changing attitudes about physical activity may be difficult, but a concerted effort is necessary and possible. Those are my words up there. I think it's something that we need to think about doing. I think a public health promotion for physical activity nationally is needed, but also locally. And some cities have done it. I mean, Portland, Oregon is making the change. They've developed the facilities and the infrastructure, but they're also changing the attitudes. And people are riding bikes and walking to work. So we're very close here. So this is what I said at the beginning with the natural resources environment that we have in this community. If we can't change the attitudes and get people to be active here, there's little hope for America. And then in the fine print, I've kind of, again, editorialized and said, so our questions are, how do we develop the facilities and make them accessible? And how do we change the attitudes that people will use them? And then an aside to that is, how do we move people from cars to human-powered modes of transportation and convince people that purposeful activity is really what we need to be looking at? Let kids know that it's okay to go out and play, that, our playgrounds are safe. There's less abductions now per capita than there used to be. It's just that they're sensationalized. We need to make sure that there's safe routes to the facilities, to the parks. And, we need to encourage kids that they don't have to play soccer in a league. They can go down to the park and call up their friends and play soccer. If there's a critical mass. Again, there's lots of barriers to this. But I'm a big believer that we have to change attitudes as we make the facilities available and the programs available. And so just my acknowledgments that this was a group effort from many, many people. I put in here probably over 5,000 volunteer hours went into this. This was unfunded research that I got sucked into and loved doing and will continue to do, mainly because it involves a lot of students going out and collecting it. So undergraduate students and graduate students, but mostly undergraduate students have had a huge hand in going out and actually putting these on, collecting them, downloading them, doing all the work that went into this. And I get all the credit because I get to sit here and show you, but this is work of many, many people. And I'm open for any other questions that you might have. That's most of my data. You'd be go to sleep if I tried to show you any more, I'm sure.
I just think that a lot of variables go into what happens to our kids and our families over the years. And you get a teacher that's got a hyperactive kid that's unmanageable, and the next thing, we used to hear stories about, they're suggesting the parents they go on to Ritalin. That happened with my niece's son. He'd walk in the living room, he'd do a cartwheel over, a somersault over the couch, cartwheel across the floor, and twirl around and fall into a chair.
Yeah.
And that's how he got across the room. And apparently he did that at school too. But my niece wouldn't hear of it. I mean, he's a bright kid. He just got more energy than most of it.
Well, there's been some very good papers that show that there's been an increase in, the attention deficit disorder as children become more sedentary. And there have been some trials of increasing physical activity in those populations, and what you find out is as they increase physical activity, the vast majority of them increase their ability to sit still and pay attention. And so what we may be seeing, partially anyway, isn't something, a new disorder that's just appearing. I mean, kids have always been very active, but they used to play more, and maybe they were a little more tired, or whatever is happening that's then, causing them to sit and listen.
I've always thought if that were possible, if that were prevalent when I was a kid, my teachers probably would have been saying, yeah, look on because I always felt like I was kind of disrupted. But and then you've got blended families, and kids have all emotions going on, and then kids on antidepressants, and then you don't just go and buy cereal. You buy cereal that might be good because it doesn't have cholesterol in it, but it's loaded with high fructose corn syrup. Well, how do our bodies, how is it used differently? I don't know. I'm sure there's some evidence research out there. but,
There is, yes. Well, you know,
if you're trying to eat healthy and get away from, fatty foods, and then you find out you're eating a bunch of junk that normally isn't found in food.
Mhm.
I just,
well, I think, your report came in to show that there's, huge number of societal factors that have come into this. I mean, we don't know what's in the food that we eat. There's little knowledge on physical activity that's increasing. But then, if you look at our infrastructure that's developing, I mean, even down to mechanical can openers. We used to have to do this to a can opener. Now you go, and everything else is being made so that a machine does it versus human power. And every time a machine does something for us, we use that much less energy. If we drive a block versus walking, if we drive a mile versus walking, or if we could go to the grocery store on your bike 5 times a week and get fresh food versus 1 time in the car and get large quantities. But our society now is pushing us to sedentary behavior, and it's modeled. Children see it from a very young age, and there are no simple solutions. I mean, we have gone way out here over a long period of time, starting in the 50s and 60s, but really probably in the 70s. So for the last 40 years, we've become a very sedentary behavior society. Some of the things that people don't know about this is that we actually eat less per capita, slightly less per capita than we did now in 1950, 1960. So the difference really in the weight gain has been in the loss of physical activity. And there's some pretty good CDC data that compares those two things.
Would you advocate that schools add 10 minutes into their day and just require faculty and students be out walking around the halls briskly?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that could happen. I mean, you could start with a mile and a half every day with a mile and a half walk or run, whatever they wanted to do, which would get them a third of their physical activity for the day. We could require buses to park 3 blocks from school would be the drop-off, and there has to be a safe route where they walk to school. When we build new schools, you put the parking lots further away. During the school day, if there were 10-minute activity breaks, but I think that's going to have to happen on an individual school-by-school basis, and hence I'm very excited about meeting with the health enhancement teachers, and I present to the principals and administrators in Billings in several weeks. But I think there's lots that can be done, a little bit at a time. But I think the big thing is the education of both the children, physical education, just that. In PE, we should not only be having them be active, but teaching them what has to be done the rest of the time. But yeah, lots of little things add up to 60 minutes pretty quickly.
I just really appreciate your work here. This is such, we've been so excited to see what would come of all of the kids that were strapped up with their bracelets.
Yeah.
And I think that your PowerPoint here, I know your work is still continuing, but is there any way we could have this on the health department website, or is it not ready yet, or is it, how can we link people to this information? I know that it's much better when you explain it, but I just think it's very dramatic. It's especially some of that.
Yeah. With the help of Greg Oliver and Kelly Rice, we actually have a very nice brochure. I'm sorry I didn't bring any over today. That was just an oversight, but I will make sure that they get to you however that works. Yeah, and then this is the problem with putting this out publicly right now is that we're working on publishing it, and if we put it out publicly first, so it might be another 3 or 4 months before we can put it out. But
I mean, that'd be plenty. It's just such a launching place, because I think that you've raised a lot of interest that we've been fairly interested, but this will really raise the level of interest, and I think that we will be seeing more action.
Yeah.
Once you have it published, could you please arrange to post the data somewhere where?
Yeah. In fact, I think some of the general material, like the decline in moderate and vigorous. We can work on a few of those graphs, and I can get permission to pre-publish those in a sense.
But even if it's going to be less than 6 months.
Oh yeah, we'll make it available to everybody in Missoula, however it works best. Yeah, that's my purpose. I have no interest in academic publications without practical application.
The 4-page summary sheet that we did has been online for 6 months and available. And actually, you guys did get a copy of that when we first produced that, because that was the more user-friendly, and it's the highlights of this. So it's a start, and that was also put out there for a bunch of school people to look at too.
And then this is being taped for MCAT.
This is a little bit off the wall, but
Well, what's new?
given your position, it's totally anecdotal. I just noticed that women who are active in competitive soccer are among my very best students. And if you look at the high school valedictorian lists around Missoula, a lot of the women that are valedictorians play soccer. I wonder if that's just from your experience and your interest, if that's something that holds up.
Yeah, but, you know, what we see, and there have been other studies that have looked at grade point averages of athletes in different sports. And the endurance sports tend to have higher grade point averages than explosive sprint type sports. And that's probably related to the amount of moderate and vigorous physical activity they do. It's continuous. But I think there's sports that are very complex, and more complex sports require more integration of ideas and knowledge. And and soccer is actually a very complex sport, and it may be that it requires very talented, not only talented physical players, but academically talented or cognitively talented individuals. And I think that's probably true of a lot of that type of sport. Basketball, lacrosse, if we played it here, hockey. Team sports tend to be, students do quite well. I mean, their average grade point averages are better.
Jim?
Yeah, when the school board was considering dropping swimming, it was noted that for the past 10 years at Hellgate, 9 of those years had at least one swimmer valedictorian.
Right.
And those are people that tend to swim year-round, not just during the season to excel in that sport.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that you see is that that high school and middle school, or younger kids that are active year-round, I think we'd see a much stronger academic performance versus athletes that only play in their sport.
And it appears different to me just anecdotally that women athletes are more likely to be scholar athletes than on the men's side. But I just wondered if that holds up with.
I don't know that right now.
We don't play
Yeah.
football.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen the same thing. I mean, you could look at several of the high schools, and been valedictorian female athletes have been dominating that. But I don't know why.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like you have a question from the audience.
From the audience, yes.
Oh, thank you for taking my public comment. I have to get back to work. My name is Carol Belland, and I'm a parent of a middle school student in Missoula County Public Schools. And I came to both thank the health department for its support. I serve as a parent volunteer on a nutrition subcommittee of a wellness leadership council that the school district was mandated to institute in its policy, wellness policy, a year ago. And I want to thank the health department for committing the resources of the Eat Smart coordinator to our work. She's been really helpful to us. And I know Dr. Gaskill was a member, I don't know if you currently are, of the Wellness Leadership Council. I did go to the August school board meeting and announce the original date for this to the school board. I know one of the trustees, Joe Toth, intended to attend this meeting to hear the presentation. I want to thank Dr. Gaskill. My son was one of the children monitored for his study In all the work that I've done as a parent activist with school issues, the school repeatedly has stated that they want to base their curriculum and strategic goals on science-based data. And there's nothing more compelling than what I see in your report, where academic achievement is the top goal for this school board and the new superintendent this year. So I'm actually calling upon you, seeking the health department's help. I have publicly requested that the school district convene its leadership council, its wellness leadership council, because there's so much work to be done. And as in many school districts around the country, these leadership councils fall to the wayside. And I consider I've done some looking over the history of public education. I'm waiting for the next revolution. When you look at all the changes that have happened in public education, I'm convinced that the next revolution in public education will come when we integrate wellness into our curriculum. Wellness, physical activity, nutrition with all the foods that kids are exposed to at school. So while I do think it's important, and thank you for meeting with the PE teachers, I do know that they're the best doing their job and that we should not abandon efforts to work through the administration, because I'm not unaware of how the challenges of the administration in structuring the school day, which is why a lot of this physical activity falls out. It's a paradox to me that in some ways I'd like to see our school day expand, but I understand that the athletic sports that happen at the end of the day are part of the reason why it needs to get out when it gets out, or otherwise the sports that they do in the afternoon would be pushed way late. But I agree that there's just administrative ways of changing the day where we could incorporate this. Much to be said for what the university and the health department can do to influence. Another interesting piece of history, when I did some research on the superintendency in our school district, the longest superintendent was C.S. Porter, and he was brought to our school district by MSU back in the 20s to develop the very first physical activity program for the public school system. So he was hired as a the first PE teacher to develop physical education, and then he went on and was promoted to superintendent and served for the longest term of superintendency. And looking at the school lunch program didn't start until World War II. Many kids walked home at lunch and also got more activity by walking home at lunch and back to school again. So anyway, the university system, the health department, I'd just like to implore upon you to write a letter to request that the school district convene its leadership council, that there's much of this work to be done, that there are great ideas for implementation that Dr. Gaskill has, and I think the key will be working through the administrative organization of the school day. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Or comment from staff?
I just want to thank you, Dr. Gaskill, for involving the staff here in this. It was real exciting for everybody to be involved in it. It's great work either way. It brought it closer to home, and we know about it sooner and better, have a little more passion and ownership of it.
Yeah, no, it's been a great collaboration. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? In the interest of our schedule, we probably better keep moving.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.